Today's episode of the WAC podcast is brought to you by Hercules Tires, the official tire of the Western Athletic Conference.
Welcome back to the WAC podcast. I'm Kendra, Sheehan, Eric Danner. We have a special guest, ESPN play-by-play broadcaster David Saltman joining us. And David, you had the incredible opportunity to call last week's game, Stephen F. Austin against Incarnate Ward. What did you like about that game? I mean, that was such a battle between two teams. They were tied at the half, forced into overtime. What did you see from that game?
Yeah, and appreciate you having me on. I liked all of it. I mean, it was an incredible game, like you said, and it was just great because it was one of those games that was close all the way, but it wasn't one of those offensive shootouts. But at the same time, it wasn't one of those games where the offenses struggled. I mean, each part of the game kind of came up at once. UIW had this big kick return late, so special teams played a factor. You had SFA with 6 sacks, and then you had Cameron Ward for UIW, and that passing offense really come through. There was so much I liked about it. I think from SFA's standpoint, that is such a cohesive unit. And WAC fans and SFA fans should be so excited because they have just about everyone back next season. I mean, obviously there's the transfer portal and you never know nowadays, but you could tell how much of a close-knit group that was. They love each other. They love Colby Carthel and his staff. And if they all come back, they're going to be really, really salty. They got to Cameron Ward and sacked him 6 times. Put a lot of pressure on that passing game. And yet on the UIW side, I couldn't be more impressed with Ward of the offense. That was the 5th time I'd done UIW this season. And one thing Ward has done for all the numbers he's had this year, and even going back to the spring, he won the Jerry Rice Award for being the best freshman in the FCS, but he's better this year. And I think the reason being, especially late, is that he's patient. He's not trying to do too much. He got sacked 10 times in a game against McNeese. And his head coach, Eric Morris, said that he has to stop trying to be Superman and do so many things on his own. And he's responded since then. They've won all 5 games. So despite all the pressure SFA got on him, and despite the fact that SFA did not allow a pass play for over 23 yards, because UIW is so explosive, Cameron Ward said, okay, I'll take what you give me. And here and there, 15-yard gain, 18-yard gain, even 6 and 8-yard gains. He was patient. He didn't throw an interception. Even after SFA had that strip sack or the strip of Kevin Brown and big Rayshad Nichols scored that touchdown with 5 minutes left to make it 28-21, Ward and UIW said, okay, we'll just come back and score. And they did with 38 seconds left before winning in overtime. 2 really tough teams that were inexperienced come playoff time, but you couldn't tell. It was a really well-played game on both ends.
Yeah, what an amazing finish that it goes to overtime. UIW is up 21-14 in the 4th quarter. As you mentioned, SFA ties it, and then the Rayshad Nichols strip of the running back, and then the rumbling, stumbling 32 yards for the touchdown was our WAC top play. And David, I saw you tweeted about that your voice may have gone up an octave when you were calling that particular play.
Maybe 5 octaves. Yeah, I kind of broke the old broadcasting rule, right? You're not supposed to be that elevated with your pitch, and I couldn't help it. It was really amazing just because of when it happened. And it was so shocking that all of a sudden you see this 307-pound guy rumbling downfield like that. And we broadcast on the visitor side at UIW. So all the fans, and you could see the sideline just get so excited. I'll be honest, when that happened and they made it 28-21, I thought to myself, how heartbreaking that could be for UIW to lose like that. And then again, for them just to respond and be like, it's no big deal. You know, we got 5 minutes, we can tie the game. And to do so, that's an attitude that's different with UIW this year, and why even going into the Sam Houston game on Saturday, that's a tall order, obviously. I mean, the Bearcats are number 1 and undefeated and the defending champs. This is a tougher UIW team, and I think they might have a shot at on Saturday because it's really hard to rattle them.
And on Saturday, we'll have the battle of Sam Houston and then future WAC member Incarnate Ward, 2 teams that are solid. Sam Houston, I mean, they have been incredible all season. Really, the past 2 years, they've got Eric Schmid, who has been a top quarterback. And then going up with Cameron Ward, what do you see from those 2 quarterbacks? They're going to battle it out and see if they can move on to the next round in the playoffs.
Yeah, Schmid's been so good. You know, as you know, Sam Houston's won 21 straight. but their last loss, which was November 2019, which is amazing, came when Schmid was injured. So the last time that Sam Houston has lost a game when Schmid started was the second game of 2019. That's in September. And they went to North Dakota, a real tough place to play in Grand Forks, and lost a close one. So Schmidt's just a winner. You look at his numbers, and they're not Cameron Ward-like. They're not even Trey Self-like with SFA. His completion percentage isn't great, but he's so steady and effective, and he's so clutch. I mean, I'm sure you remember the spring where Sam Houston was against the wall so many times, and yet Schmid and the offense was able to pull through. Obviously, that late touchdown against South Dakota State was the highlight when they scored with under a minute left to be able to win the national title. But with an effective guy like that, who's not going to make a lot of mistakes, he's so solid. And I think he knows that he doesn't need to do everything because of the defense that they have. And with Cameron Ward, his numbers have been amazing. He threw for 610 in a win over Southeastern Louisiana, but he's thrown for 300 or more yards 10 times. I think with Ward, it's going to be, as I was mentioning before, he has to be patient enough to take what Sam Houston gives him, not be rattled from the pressure. But the one difference I think they do need in this game versus the SFA game, I mentioned they didn't have any explosive pass plays in the SFA game. They're going to need to have a couple here, at least against Sam Houston. And that's easier said than done, because you have Jalen Thomas and Zion McCollum, who may be the best duo of corners in the nation. You have a team that only gives up 17 points a game. It's going to be really hard for them to continue to be as effective as they were against SFA if they're unable to get those explosive plays. But both quarterbacks are so good. And as long as Schmid doesn't make mistakes, then you got to think that at least Sam Houston's the favorite, obviously. I mean, they're undefeated for a reason and the number one seed. But we'll see if Ward and UIW are up to the challenge.
We're talking with David Saltman, who's going to be calling that UIW at Sam Houston game this Saturday. And you mentioned Schmid, the last time they lost was when he was hurt. When he was hurt this year, when they played SFA in the Battle of the Piney Woods, that was about as close a call as you can have, 21-20. Sam Houston pulled that one out. So that just illustrates how good a player he is, what he means to that team. But also, you got to think, David, that championship experience, they've been there, they've done that, might help the Bearcats as well this Saturday.
It's remarkable. And the fact they're undefeated is one thing. The fact that, except for that SFA game you mentioned when Schmid didn't start, that they dominated everyone else. Central Arkansas gave them a bit of a game in the third quarter when Sam went up to Conway earlier this season. That's remarkable to me, because you have a team that won it all in May, and then you get a month off until you got to go back and start practicing for the spring. How many times have we seen teams that are coming off success, and regardless of how talented they are, it's hard to have that high level throughout each and every game? You usually see slip-ups, and you haven't seen that from these guys. Again, they haven't come close to losing except for the SFA game when Schmid was hurt, and that's been so impressive to me. There's magic at Bauer Stadium. Their undefeated Sam Houston is all-time at home in the playoffs. You may remember James Madison gave them a huge punch early in the semifinals back in the spring, and Sam was able to pull that out. And even in the North Dakota State and Monmouth games, they had to make plays late. So if they do have a rare close game against UIW, and I don't think this is going to be incredibly one-sided, even if Sam wins, that experience and confidence comes through so much. And one more point I'll make, because you brought up the SFA game in Houston. SFA was dominating for 3 quarters, and they were up 20-7 in the fourth. And I called that game, and I'm thinking, because Keegan Shoemaker starting at quarterback with Schmid out, and you're just wondering, where's Sam going to get the offense? During breaks, we were all just wondering, where's this offense going to come from? And then Jaquez Ezer makes a big play early in the fourth. They were deep in their own territory, Sam Houston was. Ezer out leaps the defender, gains about 40 yards to give Sam some room, and then boom, that was it. It was like a freight train was just starting, and they dominated the fourth quarter and were able to win. The one key for Sam coming into Saturday is that Ezer seems healthy. He has 14 catches his last 2 games. He's been banged up off and on this season. If he's healthy and is that big threat, that makes them even harder to stop. But to your point, the experience overall with everyone coming back, it's been really something how Sam Houston has kept that consistent high level of play throughout the fall.
Well, this Saturday, the reigning national champs will take on UIW. It's their first time making it to the second round of the playoffs. That's Saturday, 2 p.m. Central Time. We're looking forward to hearing you on the call for that. But let's talk WAC football in general. I mean, we got 2 teams into the playoffs. It's the first year back in over a decade. How exciting is what you saw this season from the conference and looking to move forward for the next, several years?
Yeah, great question. So with Sam and SFA at the top, there was no surprise with Sam. I think SFA making the playoffs, especially when they started 3-3, you thought maybe they were out and put together the 5-game winning streak. And as we talked about, they have everyone coming back. So there's some excitement there, right? You have Tarleton State. I think it's a big deal that Tarleton wins 6-5 in the FCS and going over 500. And they have Stephen Duncan coming back at quarterback, right? And they have that big dominating performance over Central Arkansas to end the season to put even more legitimacy on what they did. There's some exciting times in Stephenville too. When you take that, you add that, as you mentioned, that UIW is going to be a member of the WAC. Cameron Ward is just a sophomore, so you're going to have a lot of players probably returning for the Cardinals. And then you know that Abilene Christian is going to get better. That program, I don't know if you visited Abilene before, the facilities and the support are so good. They've underachieved the last couple of years, of course, and that's why they're making a coaching change. That is a gold mine there. And so I'd be stunned if ACU doesn't make some sort of a run in the next couple of years with this new coaching staff, because I think it'll bring a lot of excitement there. Dixie State's only going to get better. Obviously, they're transitioning. Southern Utah is joining the league, and Lamar's only going to get better too. So you had a clear difference, right, between the top of the league and the bottom. I think the excitement most of all as these years go on is that I think that's going to decrease, where you're going to have games against the bottom of the league that are going to be much tougher in a couple of years than what they were in the fall.
Another thing to watch out for there, David, is UTRGV with plans
Right.
to add football and throw them into the mix. And there's a lot of support in Edinburgh in that area. And it'll be interesting to see what they can put together as far as a football program goes, assuming that everything goes according to plan.
I think that's great. And it adds excitement, right? Even with UIW joining the league and you have all these Texas teams joining. That was a huge move for the students of Edinburgh. They had to vote to accept to pay more in fees per semester hour to be able to bring football. That's going to be great to follow, because that area, it really hungers for football. And so to be able to build that program, and I think you're going to have such great local support there, because you've had a good Division II program in Texas A&M Kingsville there for quite some time, but to have a Division I program in the Valley, that's what they call the south part of Texas, that's going to really be great for the community.
And I think the story of the past couple months has been conference realignment, and it's going on at a nationwide scale, a nationwide level. What have you seen? You've been doing this for a while, from this past year and what's going on that maybe is different from some of the previous years where you've seen schools moving throughout different conferences and making those changes.
It's dizzying, is it not? Obviously, your conference has been part of it. And I know the WAC's done a really good job of trying to expand and bring in new teams. And of course, your footprint is huge in the Lone Star State and will continue for a while with the teams you have, even with Sam Houston going to Conference USA. It's one of those things where you have to grow. And I think, again, the WAC has done a good job of that. I don't think this is a surprise. It's a surprise how dizzying it's been, I think, to an extent. But this has been talked about for a while, right? That you're going to have at the FBS level these super conferences. And so it's going to get conferences below them on the FBS level scrambling. And certainly the American did, adding their teams. And then Conference USA made the response, and including adding Sam Houston and, of course, New Mexico State as well. So on the FCS level, we've seen that trickle down effect, right? I don't think it's over, but I think if you're a league that feels really good about itself, and the WAC should, then you're in really good standing because of the teams that you have.
Yeah, well, I just had an interview with Jeff Hurd, our outgoing commissioner, who's been here for 37 years. And at one point, the WAC was down to 3 schools.
Yeah.
And you look at where the WAC is now as he heads out the door and Brian Thornton comes in. Very exciting times for the WAC and WAC football in particular.
I think it's great. And again, I think it comes down to being in growth mode. You can't rest on your laurels because there are other conferences that are doing the same. It's competition, right? And so these conferences have to do all they can to be with as much strong a footing as possible. And that's why, as we talked about, UTRGV adding football is huge. Adding these Texas programs are big in Southern Utah as well. So it's exciting to see what the WAC is going to be over these next few years.
Well, David, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. David Saltman will be on the call for the UIW Sam Houston football game this Saturday, 2 p.m. Central Time. Thank you again. This is the WAC Podcast. Kendra, Sheehan, Eric Danner. Thanks for joining us every Wednesday on SoundCloud and Apple Podcasts.
And Spotify.
And Spotify.
And that too.
Make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And check out our website at wacsports.com.